This memory of mine begins about 3 years ago when I graduated high school. I had grown up with my grandparents but decided to move to a different and much larger city to live with my dad for the first time in 12 years. I somewhat knew the city already because I spent my summers with him, but this would be the first time I would have the freedom of an adult. To come and go as I pleased, drive my car anywhere, smoke cigarettes whenever I wanted. I was excited, though sad to leave all my friends. As soon as I was settled in, my dad and stepmom sat me down to discuss the few rules and what I needed to know about the complex. Basic things like go wherever you want, but let us know when you leave, when you're coming back, even if it's 2 a.m. Oh, and you'll have to park on the street because the apartment complex has limited parking. One more thing. There's this neighborhood creep. This guy, George, was well known to all the women in the complex, as well as the police that patrolled the area. He was tall and fairly large, very intimidating looking. My parents were pretty certain that he would leave me alone for one reason: my dad. Though George had a habit of stalking other women in the complex, he would stop and find a new target if they had a man make a show of being in their place. A brother, a lover, or a father. It didn't matter what he was to the woman or what he looked like. George would back off immediately. Since I lived with my dad, who was also quite tall and rather big and intimidating, I felt confident that I would be alright. And I was for a time. It started about 6 months after I moved in. My stepmom and dad were fighting a lot more until she got up and left him. One night I was sitting on my porch having a cigarette and browsing Facebook or whatever. I wish I could say that I felt like I was being watched, but I probably just looked up because I felt a bug or something. George was standing about 15 feet away, a little bit behind a tree, staring intently at me. I nearly dropped my cigarette. Shakily, I stubbed it out and went inside. I was home alone, so I made sure to lock all my doors, and then played a video game in my room. I told myself that I was probably just paranoid. The next morning, I got up for my morning cigarette and coffee. Lo and behold, minutes after I got onto my porch, George came ambling out of his apartment to look my way. I sucked down my cigarette and went back inside. This pattern continued for a couple weeks. It was like George stood at his sliding glass door peeking out, waiting to see when I would pop out. I told my dad about it, and he tried to sit with me whenever I went to smoke. If he came with me, George wouldn't even peep a head out of his door. Of course, the other women in the complex have already tried to call the police about George, but he lives in the complex, and staring isn't a crime, so there wasn't much they could do. I didn't know how far George had taken it with the other women before. With that info in my mind, I knew calling wouldn't be much use. Things slowly escalated. Once my stepmom left, I had access to her parking spot, so I had 3 ways to get from my car to my apartment, depending on how I parked. One of the ways went just past George's apartment, about 5 feet from his door. I avoided that route as much as possible. Slowly but surely, like he memorized my schedule, he would be on one of the paths when I was coming home. Not directly on the concrete, but a few feet away on the grass, behind a tree. It was like he thought I couldn't see him. Picture a child hiding very terribly behind a tree. You can see 90% of their body, and you know that they are there. That's how he would do it. I would rush past him, avoid eye contact, but prepare to scream if I heard him come after me. I started to carry my keys between my fingertips. I bought a pocket knife, and I would walk from my car with it halfway open already, even though I've never been in any kind of fight in my life. Around this time, I believe my mom was trying to find me free self-defense classes, since I couldn't afford anything on my tight budget. My dad was steadily getting more and more pissed off as George edged closer and closer to escalating as the days went by. It went from November to May. If my dad wasn't home, I would lock my bedroom door and keep my knife under my pillow. I would Skype all night with my boyfriend, just so someone could call 911 for me, if need be. I put a bunch of flower pots in front of my bedroom window so no one could get in silently. I started sitting on the floor of my porch below the wall, out of sight, to smoke, but angled so I could see him if he walked up to it. Nightmares of being kidnapped or raped or murdered started to invade my sleep every night. Then one day my neighbor, Shell, was gossiping to me. "Did you hear about George?" "No." "He got arrested last night." In the apartment parking lot, There's a big sort of electrical power box. It stands about waist height and is perhaps 2 or 3 feet wide. About 10 minutes before I was supposed to come home and park right in front of it, some lady with her kid walking by saw George sitting on the box, masturbating. Was he waiting there for me, jerking off to the thought of me seeing him? Ugh. The thought makes me want to puke and scares me all at the same time. I was relieved for a few days of my stress, but it was only for a few days that he was gone. Then he was back, and he went right back to the same old routine. One night, he got far braver. It was about 7 p.m. when I went out for a cigarette with my dad. A neighbor walked up to chat with my dad, and George came outside and stood out in the open, staring me down. "Dude's asking to get his fucking ass kicked," my dad said under his breath. Then he chatted to the neighbor some more. I rolled my eyes, went inside, and played some more video games. I was healing in a World of Warcraft dungeon when I heard Shell shouting, "Where are you?" But I was healing, a pretty important job, and I figured she was talking to someone else, until she burst into my room in a panic. Her eyes were huge. She hopped from foot to foot frantically, like she was doing the potty dance. "He's bleeding!" "Who?" I asked in bewilderment. "Your dad, come quick." I made some teenager huffing sound and left my computer, certainly pissing off the rest of the group. I grabbed our little first aid kit filled with band-aids. I thought in my mind that my dad was doing something stupid like tossing up his pocket knife and trying to catch it. But when I stepped outside, I found myself face to face with a real horror. About 6 people surrounded my dad, including Shell, and my neighbor Caleb held a shirt to my dad's side. He was facing away from me, and his entire back was just covered in blood. It looked like he had been mauled by a bear. That was seriously my first thought. I didn't know we had bears in the city. Caleb's hold on the shirt slipped, and blood sprayed. I feel queasy writing this down. I have never in my life been the person people turn to in an emergency. Blood makes me lightheaded, and I have anxiety attacks over not being able to find a specific bookmark. But all of the adults, people around 30 to 40, while I was just 18, around me were panicked aside from Caleb. I needed to be the person that people turn to. I threw the first aid kit onto the pouch and told Shell where we keep our towels. She rushed to go grab one. "Has anyone called 911? I shouted. 5 pairs of eyes turned to look at me, like they'd never heard of 911 before. "No," my dad said. "I can't afford an ambulance." "Shut up," I said. "What happened?" "That fucker stabbed me." So I dialed 911 and relayed our address and reason for emergency. Operator told us to keep applying pressure to the wound on my father's lower back. My dad is a true champ. Even though the sidewalk was just one big puddle of blood, he stayed on his feet until someone thought to run and get him a chair. I ran back and forth along the walkways to get to the police and show them the house that George lived in, and then I ran back and forth to get the paramedics. They were so cold and so agonizingly slow. They walked calmly, and I wanted to scream at them to run. "My dad could be bleeding out, don't you care?" I learned later that they don't run because if they let adrenaline kick in, mistakes can happen. They shoved Caleb out the way because he refused to let go of my dad's wound, and got him packed into the ambulance. I was about to jump on too when police stopped me and told me that I had to stay so I could give my statement. My dad shouted at me to call his boss, and I remembered all his allergies and whatnot for the paramedics. 2 years later, and all these details have been burned into my brain. I gave my statement to the police, then they made me sit outside the complex on the sidewalk for 2 to 3 hours. They kept me updated on my dad. Once I had called his boss, my boss, and answered my stepmom's message, that's when I allowed myself to break down. It felt like I cried for forever. One of the cops was nice enough to go into my house and grab my cigarettes and a bottle of water for me. He stayed with me the entire time to make sure I didn't run off or something, but he was very nice. He offered to let me sit in his cruiser a few times to get away from the cold. George was waiting in his apartment when they came, when they took him out to where I was, and there were 14 cop cars. He still kept trying to stare at me. I stared right back and felt such hatred that I have never in my life felt. I wanted to go over there and murder him. My babysitting cop looked over and saw that George was staring, so he used his flashlight to keep George from being able to look at me. Once it was all over, I was allowed to go back to my house, where I waited for information about my dad. I gathered the story from my neighbors while he was in the hospital for 9 days. He had shouted at George to leave his daughter alone, and George had shouted back at him while I was in the house, totally unaware. George said something along the lines of, "Come tell me that to my face like a man." So my dad hopped over the porch and waltzed up to him. The creep had been waiting with a 12-inch blade held to the side of his leg. He struck out with his empty hand and then got my dad in the back with his knife. It missed his kidney very, very narrowly, traveled up and punctured his lung and damaged his diaphragm. My dad didn't realize he had been stabbed at first. He got George into a headlock and pummeled the shit out of him, thinking the dude had just punched him in the kidney. George dropped the knife, rolled in the grass, and picked up another knife he had been hiding and stabbed my dad again, this time in the upper back. This wound was much more shallow. At this point, Shell came outside and screamed to my dad that he was bleeding. He took off his shirt, got pissed, and threw it at George. At that point, the neighborhood stalker put his hands up and went into his apartment. The blood stayed on the pavement until about noon the next day, when my neighbors kindly washed it off for me. I still have pictures in my email of it, as well as my dad's injuries. My dad spent more time in the hospital in critical condition than George spent being held in jail. I felt like it was my fault. I've been addressing that in therapy, but I still felt awful about it, like my dad had to fight my own battle for me. Throughout the week while I was on my porch, or just outside, I had so many women come up to me. They all told me to thank my dad for them. They had all been terrorized by George at some point, and now they were certain he would be away for good. Several poor women had had George stalk them up to their apartment door and pull his pants down, demanding sex. I can't believe the cops couldn't do anything. One of those days, one of my neighbors came up to me to tell me that the police and neighbors had searched the complex and found that George had stashed many knives all over the place, buried in gardens, stuck behind trees, under his doormat. I shudder to think that he might have planned to one day grab one of his targets and do something far more sinister than stare. George was declared guilty for battery with a deadly weapon, but the attempted murder charge was dropped. He was out of prison by Christmas on good behavior or whatever. But my dad and I have a lifelong restraining order against him. He has never tried to come after me, so I can only hope that he's terrified of my dad. I wish I could tell you guys that I took self-defense classes and learned to fight the way my dad can, but I'm still a pussy who can't even slap a spider. So, there's that. My dad is doing alright now. He's just had his third surgery on Tuesday, trying to repair the damage done to him internally. We're hoping that this will be his last, and his quality of life will vastly improve. I probably owe my life to my dad. If he hadn't fought George for me, maybe I would have been the first victim George stabbed. Just a little background check. I'm a female and was 12 when all this started, and I lived in a very calm part of my estate in Ireland. My mom is involved too, but not as much as I am. So now on to the story. It was 12 a.m. and had just turned Christmas Day when we got a knock on our door. I was taught not to open the door to strangers, especially when it's 12 a.m., so I just ignored it and hoped that whoever it was would just go away. About 3 minutes later, I heard another knock, but this time it was like a huge bang at the door. I was terrified and didn't know what to do. By instinct, I went and got my mom to answer. When she answered, this drunk Romanian guy who had a very scruffy beard and was wearing a white hoodie was just standing there and asked, "Can I walk your dog? I have my dog with me, so she'll be fine." And my mom of course said no. I was a bit away from the door, but that's all I could hear him say. My mom kept politely asking for him to go away, and when she had enough, she closed the door. The next morning, I was sitting having my breakfast, and my mom brings up the incident to my dad. So, me being me, I started eavesdropping and took off one of my headphones. I was really scared because that's the guy who stalks me in the bushes while walking Molly, our dog. When she said that, my heart sank so deep into my chest that it started to hurt. So you'd think that's the end of it. Fast forward 3 years, and I'm home alone watching TV upstairs in my room, when I had just had this sudden urge to look outside my window. And let me tell you, I was terrified. The same man was standing in my empty driveway, looking up into my bedroom. I got so freaked out and without hesitation, immediately closed my curtains over. No more than 10 seconds later, there was a huge bang at my front door, and I hear the handle being played with. I was fucking paralyzed. When he finally stopped with the door handle, I heard the windows downstairs shatter into shards, and I heard him climb in. I sprinted into my bathroom and locked the door behind me, bringing my phone with me. I hear really fast thumps go up the stairs, and hear my bedroom door open, and once he realizes I'm not there, he immediately goes for the bathroom door handle. He starts trying to kick the door down, and was screaming that he would rape and kill me. I called 999, and within 5 minutes I hear, "Put your hands up, do it now." I was so fucking terrified that it took me almost 30 minutes to get out of the bathroom. The officer told me that he had a backpack, and in there they found dildos, condoms, a rope, a gag, bleach, and a meat cleaver. Also, I want to add that if the officers had arrived 5 minutes later, then I don't know what would have happened to me, as within 5 kicks, he would have kicked the door down, and I don't want to know what would have happened to me if he did get in. This was a truly horrifying experience. I should start by saying I'm a broke-ass college student. Female, by the way. Anyhow, because of my strange college hours, and even my stranger work hours, I am often on a weird eating schedule, lunch at like 5 p.m. and dinner around 11 p.m. Well, after my family has went to work, yes, all the people in my house work nights. So I find myself wandering 30 plus minutes away from my house in search of decent food. Never been a problem, as I live in a nice town. I usually end up at Sheetz, where I can get somewhat vegetarian foods. If you don't know what Sheetz is, it's a gas station with hot food to go. So this week, I ended up at Sheetz more than one night in a row. Each night there was a girl working at the register that always talked to me longer than I would like. She was friendly though, so I was polite and talked back. She always brought up the most random things, such as whether or not I made my pants or bought them with all the holes in them. Which was fine, but a simple answer wasn't good enough. She would continue to talk about them, even though there was really nothing to say. I got a Coke, so naturally she wanted to talk to me about Coke for 10 minutes straight. Just strange stuff like that. So I assumed she was just bored on the job. Until last night when I got home from Sheetz. Yes, I had seen her there, but like I said, she worked there, and really hadn't done anything to me yet. Now, I would have loved to say something led up to it, like I was nervous the entire walk home, or I felt like something was wrong, but actually, I felt entirely safe. I got back to my apartment and ate my food and edited YouTube videos. There are 3 floors to my building. I live on the 3rd, with only one other person across the hall from me, so I wasn't totally worried when I heard footsteps come up the stairs. But it just got weird. I never heard them go into their house, and my cat was now at the door, silent, but aggressively trying to sniff under it, and digging at the carpet as if she wanted to dig her way under the door. This was when I saw the shadows, which appeared to be someone's feet. No one knocked though. I told myself I would satisfy my cat's curiosity and my own worries by opening the door to see nothing there, and then I could get back to what I was doing. I was dead wrong though. I opened the door rather blindly because there is no way to see into the hallway, and again I wasn't expecting anyone. I certainly wasn't expecting someone to throw my door open and force themselves in past me. She ran as fast as possible right to my bedroom, the first room you would see, and slammed the door behind her. I of course noticed it was the Sheetz employee, who by the way, looked like an average 19 to 20-year-old girl. I grabbed my brother's baseball bat and reluctantly inched towards my door, and also in the direction of my phone so I could call the police. Then I heard my neighbors, and of course, snapped back into reality. I turned around and ran across the hall, where I shakily told them what had happened. I stayed in their apartment until the cops came. It took them 20 minutes to get into my room to get her, as she had locked the door. What they found chills me to the bone, mostly because I hadn't noticed her carrying anything with her. There were at least 10 candid pictures of me from days prior, coming into the store, ordering food, going into the bathroom, etc., all printed on cheap printer paper. What scares me the most of all is that some of them were from weeks prior, before she had actually talked to me and had register duty. There were also wine bottles, flowers, and rope, so do what you'd like with that information. Part of me wonders if she would have even tried to come in had I not started to open the door first. I still have no idea how she followed me without me knowing. I'm a 16-year-old guy, and I wasn't expecting this to happen to me, so I just want to point out that this doesn't only happen to women. 2 days ago, I was coming back from school. For background information, the bus students go to goes to the center of town. I take that one, and then I take another bus to get to my stop, where I have to walk maybe 200 or 300 meters away from my house. I took the bus from school towards the center, then waited at my stop. There were other kids from other schools that waited, and the creep. He wore his hat down and was glancing at me every now and then. I ignored him by putting my earphones on. This lasted for about 10 minutes until the bus finally came. I forgot about the guy, but was still creeped out. I got on the bus and took an empty seat. I noticed the creep got on the bus too, and he was walking towards me. My red flags weren't out yet, but I still checked just in case. He took a seat behind me, and then the bus started heading to the next stop. I heard something in the background of my music. I turned the volume down, and I heard a voice from behind me, from this same fucking guy. I pressed pause and heard him ask, "Hey, I think we live near each other. Can you just tell me at which stop we are supposed to leave?" Of course, you'd think it's stupid of me to tell him the truth, but it'd be a bit of an asshole move to tell him bullshit if he lives near me. The bus approached near a stop that is at 5 or 6 stops from my place. I changed seats, imitating as if I needed to get off the bus. The creep moved too. Damn it, he's lying and is following me. I then waited for one of the busier stops, and God was with me, because there was a crowd of teens, probably planning to smoke and drink. As soon as the doors opened, I ran the fuck away from the bus, and crossed the roads, and entered a random shop. I kept my head down, and looked out the window. As soon as the students were separating, I looked for the creep, and I could see him, looking for me. I took off my hoodie and put it in my bag. I then went to the bathroom to make my hair wet. I fucked up my hair to make myself look at least a little different, and then left the shop. I walked the long way towards the next shop, making turns as often as I can. After walking around a bit, I went to a small cafe and waited there a bit. I sent a text to my dad to see if he could come get me. He asked me why, and I told him the whole thing. He picked me up like Usain Bolt and then drove me home. I don't know who the hell the guy was. I don't think he lives near me, and I fucking hope not. But whatever the fuck it is, creep in the bus. Let's not meet. From 2006 to 2011, I worked in the electronics department at the local Walmart in the small city I lived in. Through those 5 years I had worked there, I had plenty of creepy encounters with strange customers, especially considering the state hospital was directly across the road. This story isn't a regular old creepy encounter, but something that would lead to me being stalked for nearly a year. It all started in 2010, on a night I was working second shift. I was doing my end of shift ritual when a woman in her late 40s interrupted me. She was with a little girl, no more than 3 or 4. "Excuse me, I need help with my cell phone." She spoke softly. She proceeded to tell me her problem. I need to turn my phone into a straight talk phone. The girl earlier said you could do it. Of course she fucking did. I thought to myself, but my lips said, sure, let's see what I can do. She handed me a 6-year-old phone from Verizon, and I knew as soon as I saw it I wouldn't be able to do what she wanted. I explained she would have to buy a new phone from Straight Talk and transfer her old number. Basic shit, really. Now, I always took my job seriously and held myself to the highest standard of customer service. I would often receive letters to the store from customers complimenting me. So, I assure you I did nothing to actually piss off this lady. But sure as shit, she was pissed. Why the hell would I buy a new phone? I already have one. She's screaming at the top of her lungs. Her claims of me upselling her and being a corporate goon. I finally managed to defuse the situation, and as she left the department, she gives me the classic, "You'll never get a job in this town again." As I'm getting ready to leave my shift, my manager stops me and tells me I got a complaint at customer service from a lady claiming I swore at her granddaughter. Apparently, I told her to fuck off. I explained what happened, and he just laughed it off. My managers knew it was very unlike me to say anything like that to a customer. I wish the story ended there, but then I wouldn't be writing this. For the next several weeks, I would get complaints about things I've never done, sometimes even on my days off. I would come into questions from management nearly every day. It was complaints ranging from me being rude to a customer all the way to me doing drugs in the parking lot on break. All these complaints were coming from 2 women. As it turned out, it was Cell Phone Lady and her adult daughter. It turns out that they have even been scoping out my work schedule and started coming in nearly every day. They would walk through electronics to make sure they saw me, and later that night, I would have a complaint. This happened for months. It happened so much management deemed her my favorite customer. To be honest, I didn't care much. I even thought it was pretty funny. I never got in trouble, and everyone knew these ladies and just blew it off. I started caring when she took it to a new level. She started to follow me around. I would see her when I was around town. She made it clear she knew where I lived and would often walk by my house. I would see her standing out front, just looking at my place. I began getting complaints to the city about my property, grass too tall, the old shed in my yard, my fire pit, basically everything. She even found out my girlfriend's name and began complaining at her job. I knew it was her. She would make it so clear that she was following me. Sometimes she would stop in and ask me questions at work and act like the nicest customer. A few times she asked me things like, "How's your girlfriend?" Or my favorite, "How can you afford that big house on your little Walmart wage?" For about 7 months, she stalked and slandered me. I started telling her I knew what she was doing and to stop, but she played it off. I couldn't report her. She never once threatened me. She was just making my life miserable. By this time, everyone in my life knew about this nut job. One night, I'm grabbing dinner with my friends from work, and we're joking about it when someone says, "What if you just counter-stalk her?" At first, I thought it was a terrible idea, but then they convinced me it would work, and they would all help me. So, we hatched a plan. It went as follows: find her job, find her name and address, make complaints in the same manner as her, find out all the rumors she's told about me, make it clear that we know, show her that we have numbers. I found out her information easily enough. Turns out she didn't live anywhere near me. I was even friends with a few of her ex-coworkers. They would keep me informed on crazy shit she said about me, and even told her to stop. We began doing exactly what she was doing to me. We did this for about 4 months. The more we dug into her life, the more I found out about how obsessed she was over getting me in trouble. She had claimed that I assaulted her. She urged others to report and follow me. She told police I was a potential drug dealer. Eventually, we won though. She started putting together that there were 6 of us digging into her life and asking questions about her. My last month at work, I didn't get a single complaint. In fact, I never even saw her anymore. The day after I quit though, I heard she was in the store complaining about a new person after asking one of the managers why I quit. I'll honestly never understand why she was so hell-bent on destroying me. I just told her to buy a $20 prepaid phone. In the 8th grade, I had a stalker, one that I never saw, and one that never said anything in malice towards me. Back in 8th grade, probably halfway through the school year, I received a phone call from an unknown caller. Usually, I would not answer for a number I didn't recognize, or sometimes I would do so in an accent, but I would always hang up after a second or two. Things changed. However, when the second I answered, I heard a man say my full name in a questioning tone, like he was asking for confirmation that this was me. Being just a kid and thinking this was one of my parents' friends, or someone who I could talk to, I told him that that was me. Big mistake, but I didn't know at the time. The first phone call I don't remember much of, except he hung up not long after I said that was me. Some time passed, maybe less than a week, when I got an unknown call again. I didn't answer, and then I kept getting spam calls. So I finally answered, and this guy was asking me about what shows I like to watch. I got the idea that maybe I shouldn't be talking to this guy, so I just hung up. Not much longer, another couple calls came in until I said to stop calling me. And he responded something to the effect of, "Hanging up mid-conversation is rude." My dad heard me and asked me who I was talking to, so I told him that I didn't know and handed him the phone. My dad asked who this was and to stop calling my number in his angry dad tone. Then he got a confused face for a second before getting really angry and shouting at them before they abruptly hung up. My dad later told me that this person knew my father's name, Carlos, and told him, "Don't be so angry, Carles," before hanging up. Pretty soon these calls would happen at least once a day, and I would almost always hand the phone to my dad for him to yell at the guy. We told all our friends and family to stop if they were prank calling me. We tried getting police involved, and we also contacted my middle school saying that there was a guy being creepy with me. The guy never called during school hours, and he usually would call at first when I was home alone, but soon switched it up to calling around the time my father got home from work. This guy sounded young. For a long time, we thought my uncles or their friends were playing pranks on us. He sounded maybe mid to late 20s, and sounded sort of Latino, never had an angry tone, and never said anything malicious. But he was a stalker, and he knew the names of my parents, sister, my dogs, some cousins, and my grandparents. He never called when we had company over, and it was never after 8 p.m. At one point, I was sitting in my room and got a call. By this point, it was nearing the last few weeks of school, and because this guy never said anything bad, and police said that there was nothing to do, I just answered the phone and asked what he wanted. I remember, clear as day, he was listing off video games. Red Dead Redemption, Modern Warfare 2, Halo 3. I looked to my game stand and saw he was reading off the list in order that my games were, top to bottom. I stood up and looked out the window, but nobody was there. After the list was done, I just stood there, and he told me something about me having good taste in games, and that we should play sometime. At this moment, I was scared shitless. I cried and called my dad. He came home early, and we realized, like idiots, that we could just change my number. We changed my number, and I purged my Facebook account, and we all set our accounts to private. Maybe 6 months later, we moved, and after changing the number, I never got any calls from this guy. The reason I came to tell this story is because I've been getting unknown numbers calling me for the past couple of days, and I never answer them anymore. But telling my girlfriend about it, she reminded me about the guy, so I will be changing my number soon, as a precaution.